Hello, everyone. My name is Joseph Sciorra, and this is Calandra Corners, a new series that we have instituted at the Calandra Institute to have conversations with colleagues and friends, artists, scholars of various sorts. And today I'm really excited to have with us Stefano Albertini, who is the director of Casa Italiana Zedili Marimo at New York University, a premier site for all things Italian and Italian diaspora. And Stefano is a dear and close friend of the Calandra Institute. So welcome, Stefano.
Thank you, Joe. It's a great pleasure to be here. I'm very fond of the Calandra, of the work that you, Anthony Tamburi, and your colleagues do. And when I saw that you were doing the chats, I said, I want to chat with Joe. Any chance to chat with Joe, either remotely or in person, I'll jump on it.
There you go. There you go. So tell us a little. People know you as the director of the Casa Italiana, but maybe you could tell the viewers a little bit about your scholarly background, your interest, your fields that you've worked in, and the classes that you teach.
Yeah, I'm an historian by training. I graduated in history from the University of Parma, and then coming to the U.S. Sort of the spectrum of my interest broadened up, and I was in Italian studies. It was the most, let's say, easy choice for me. It's also something that I really love. But I expanded and I did more literary work, and I started studying cinema as well. Even if that too, I started in Parma. So I wrote about contemporary history, and especially about the relationship between church and state during fascism. But I also wrote on Dante, essays on Dante, politics, language. I would say the fil rouge, the common thread, has always been politics, be it in an historical context or in a literary context. Like my dissertation is on Niccolo Machiavelli and the rhetoric of violence in his works. And one would say, well, you wrote about fascism and then Machiavelli and then Dante. Yeah, it's a bit of everything. And the courses I teach right now are a very successful course on Machiavelli. I'm teaching it right now. I have 40 students all over the world. And I also teach courses on cinema. And they're not technically about cinema. Also, of course, we go in also into the technical aspects of cinema, but they're mostly courses in which we use cinema as a tool to talk also about other things. So I have a course on cinematographic adaptations of Italian novels. So it's cinema and literature. And it's basically looking at the two different languages used to tell the same story. And then I have a course on Italian cinema and history. And it's about how cinema represented Italian history and how cinema shaped the view, the way in which Italians and non-Italians look at their history. And they're both fun courses. I like to insert new films every time and see the reaction of the students. And so, yes, definitely teaching is the less known part of what I do, but I have to confess it remains the one that I have more fun doing.
Hmm. And you also bring students to Florence each summer before COVID, naturally.
Yes, I've been doing that for a long time, for more than 20 years, actually, since I basically more or less since I started it at NYU. I run the summer program of NYU in Florence. That's where I am right now. I'm not from Florence. I'm from a small village up north in the province of Mantua. It's called Bozzolo, that it means cocoon. And but Florence has become, throughout the years, my adoptive Italian city, because that's where I spend most of my time when I'm in Italy. And NYU has a beautiful campus here. It was the biggest gift ever received by an American institution. And so when I'm there in the summer, I feel really the luckiest man around, because it's a Renaissance gardens and olive groves. And I just got my bottle of olio nuovo from the olive trees at La Pietra that my colleagues sent me. That's a tradition. They harvest the olives with the students that are there. They make the new oil that every Florentine household must have. And I just got my bottle.
Wonderful. Sounds great.
Yes.
So the reason we're having this conversation in part, or to a large degree, is because you've been invited to do one of the special tracks on the Criterion's Blu-ray reissue of Moonstruck, 1987 film by Norman Jewison, written by John Patrick Shanley, and of course, starring Cher and Nicolas Cage. Tell us a little bit how they contacted you. What was that like?
The First of all, I'm a huge fan of the Criterion collection, and I think they do some of the best work in terms both of the digital restoration of the things they do, their choice both of American films, great classics and films, and of foreign films is absolutely unparalleled.
Yeah.
I'm not afraid. It's not commercial, but I really admire the kind of work they do. And through the years, we became friends because we have this sort of tradition that whenever they come up with something new that is Italian or Italian American, we present it at the Casa. We are neighbors. They have their office in Union Square.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that.
I love going to their office because if I go there to record a piece, then they let me sneak in the magic room where I can pick up a few Blu-rays and DVDs.
Lovely.
And that's a ritual that they do with all their guests. Like you go and pick. And they're a bunch of super smart people working there. They're, of course, all film buffs and incredibly competent. And so we started by presenting Italian films in new release form, either the film itself or some of the extra content that they produce for the releases at the Casa. And then they started asking me to be part of these pieces, or I would volunteer for some of them. So when I first started talking to them, I said, make sure that when you do Senso by Visconti, for example, I want a piece in that. I have something I want to say. So the relationship is very friendly with many of them. And then when I saw the results of the work they do, the way in which they edit the pieces and they add the context and the clips, they make me sound so smart, and they improve the quality of my speech in such a way that I think it happened to me only another time for an interview on NPR. When they have this art of polishing what you're saying and really making it just perfect. I barely recognize myself. So it's fun to work with them because, again, they're super competent. And so I love to be part of their project and to work with them on a concept for a piece and then shaping it and doing my research about it. I was supposed to do something else about Christ Top the Table that they just released, and I couldn't because that piece required a lot of access to a lot of visual material that I didn't have and couldn't have during the quarantine period, the lockdown. And so they asked me about Moonstruck. The piece I did on Senso, on Lucchino Visconti Senso, it was on opera and cinema. Because I don't know if you remember, but the beginning of Senso is this fantastic scene inside the La Fenice Theater in Venice during a performance of Trovatore. It's this super over-the-top, operatic beginning. And I think the reason why they asked me to do this piece on opera in Moonstruck was because of that piece there.
Okay.
So I had a chance to rewatch the film and so on.
Great. I haven't seen, I watched the film when it came out, saw it when it came out, and watched it about a year ago. But I don't have all the sort of scenes fixed in my head, in my memory. Tell it. So the Cher and Nicolas Cage's character go to the Metropolitan Opera here in New York City, and they go see Puccini's La Bohème.
Yes.
And it's a very, it's a very emotional moment for them both, and they kind of they bond in a whole other level than they did previously.
Yes, absolutely. But Joe, before we start with trying to reconstruct what happens and how it relates to opera. I cannot resist but ask you questions. It's normally my job to interview, and I accepted to do this with you because I did want it to be a chat. And while I was rewatching it this summer for the piece, I was scratching my head and I was thinking, what is my friend Joe thinking about this scene? Or how did he feel when the movie came out? I saw that it was one of the most, and in my conversations with many of our Italian American friends, for many of them, it's like their favorite film ever. And I know that many others have problems with it. So I wanted to know, what was your reaction when the film came out, when you saw it for the first time back then? Because it's not a new film. It's 1987, so it's quite a lot of time passed by. I just graduated college myself.
Right. I think I was still working on my master's thesis at NYU when it came out, on the music of the Brooklyn Giglio Feast here in New York. When I saw it, went to the movie theaters, and I did not like it. I didn't like it because it was so over the top and operatic. I mean, like Cher's hair, and her shoulder pads. It was just too much. It was too much. And of course, I found it rather corny, the ending rather corny, it's all about family. And it just seemed to be trafficking in a lot of this. For me, it trafficked in a lot of stereotypes about Italian Americans and Italians to some degree, of being very emotional, being very demonstrative, over the top. And then,
aren't we, Joe?
Huh? Yes. Well,
aren't we?
Of course, right? Of course we are, sociologically speaking. And I guess it didn't suit me. I guess it wasn't. Not that I wanted to see more mafia movies,
That's what I wanted to ask you, Joe. Because when I was watching it, and I was thinking, why is it such an important film for many Italian Americans and many super smart Italian Americans I know? Has it to do with the fact that, for a change, it's a major studio production about Italian Americans, and it's not about mafia? There is not a reference to mafia.
Right.
It's like, no, it's not there. It's not about that. Do you think it was like a collective sigh of relief in the Italian American community, saying, whoa, there can be a great film, like major film for huge audiences, that does not talk about the mafia?
Yeah, no,
therefore,
I think
they could sort of condone the sort of stereotypical representation of the Italians screaming at the dinner table.
And the family, of course, about it again, that whole family, and the sort of comic reliefs of breaking various family routines and ties between, Danny, when Cher is at the airport seeing the Danny Aiello character go off, there's that other woman who curses the airplane because of her sister who's on it. And this is kind of an incredible breach of family affiliations. And of course, all the father who's fooling around and
Akumare.
And Cher as well, who's her fiance, and she's with the brother. So there's all these breaches of family, but in the end, right, everybody comes together, everything's okay, and they're all around the kitchen table. This constant motif of the kitchen table, in this incredibly non-working class, as we know, Brooklyn Heights apartment, which I guess. For me, the other thing that really irked me was, in fact, the disjunctures of geography that the film dabbled in, to a degree where, like many Hollywood films, where they're driving down someplace in Manhattan and they turn a corner and then they're in Queens. That is always problematic.
With all it takes us to go from one place to the other.
Yeah.
We take it personally because respect our daily stress
Our
of moving to the
topography. I
streets
mean, it's, for God's sakes.
and of course, it's one of your research interests is the topography of culture. It's like culture is connected to specific places.
Yeah.
And your work, on monuments and shrines, and they're never in a place randomly. They are always there for some very important reason. And one of the things you do is discover why is that thing there rather than somewhere else. So I can totally relate to the fact that when you see these jumps from the interior of an apartment in a place overlooking some other place, it's like almost offensive. But did you have a problem with the fact that this is a very Italian American film, perceived as such, and yet the presence of Italian Americans in the cast, in the crew, in the writing, in the creative division is almost none? Did you have a problem with that?
I think, trying to remember, part of my...
Or do you now? I mean, you don't need to.
No, now I think at the time I actually did. It's like, how dare Cher play an Italian-American character? And who's this John Patrick Shanley? What does he know about Italian-Americans?
I think there was a little... Italian to me.
There was a little bit of that initially, I'll say. But no, I mean, I don't think that's a prerequisite. I think she does a really wonderful job. I think she's fun and exciting, and I think a lot of the Olympia Dukakis is really and Vincent Gardenia. They're really wonderful. I guess the only problem I do have a problem with the grandfather, because his Italian doesn't seem authentic in any way.
The grandfather howling at the moon, right? Going to the cemetery with the dog. It's like, yeah.
Yeah, I remember that. I mean, that stuff always kind of bothers me. But no, I don't think that actors need to be Italian American to play Italian Americans. But to get back to your initial question, I think the fact that this was the studio production, Hollywood film by all standards, with somebody like a Cher, and Jewison was. Maybe not known to most viewers, but a significant Hollywood director, was an important contributing factor to the reasons why many Italian Americans like the film. I mean, yes, I agree with you. I mean, I've met people whose opinion I respect who tell me they love the film, and it even after watching it, I watched it about a year ago. I don't know. I said, let me give it another try. And I have to say that I didn't like it any more, and I didn't dislike it any less. I mean, I kind of felt I had maybe a little bit more appreciation for it, because, but it still didn't totally touch me. And of course, there are these moments that have become now iconic cinematic moments that, after Cher and Nicolas Cage's character get up the next morning after having spent the night together, and that snap out of it, that's just a meme that gets generated over and over again. It's a wonderful, wonderful moment. And Nicolas Cage's monologue down in the inferno of the bakery.
Exactly.
Is it's over the top, and it's really enjoyable.
And Nicolas Cage, I knew vaguely that he was Italian American, and then when I did the piece, I looked him up, because he is the character through which opera comes into the movie. I mean, he is Italian American aristocracy on both sides, as much as you can have it. He's like the grandson of the opera composer Carmine Coppola. He's the nephew of Francis Ford Coppola. So there you go. In him, I mean, there aren't many Italian Americans, but the one that is there is like these royalty of Italian American intelligentsia, combining the cinematographic scope of the Coppolas and the operatic scope of the Coppolas, because they also have these incredible musical talent in reviving opera and producing contemporary opera. So I thought that was interesting. They casted one in a major role, but the one they casted is like, for so many symbolic reasons, and the more you read about his biography and his family, you say, no, this kid is really the little Italian American prince snapping out of it. And then his rage scenes, they also become sort of I saw that there are entire collections of Nicolas Cage losing it. The moment in different films in which he loses it. And he's really a great actor.
Yeah, it's good.
Phenomenal actor. No, thank you, because I wanted to ask you about that element of the freeing the collective imagination of Italian Americans from mafia. Do you think that also served? And we were saying that probably the follow up to this film, ideally because of the scope of the production, the fact that there is no mafia, there is very Italian America, would be Big Night.
Right.
These two films that come like about 10 years apart, right? How did you feel that was taken by Italian Americans? Were they really relieved that the term of comparison or the public image on the big screen in Hollywood was no longer The Godfather, but something else?
Yeah, I mean, those Italian Americans who decry the depiction of Italian American gangsters in cinema and on TV, they have now historically posited this sort of binary scenario where it's either negative images and positive images, and so that even a great film like The Godfather or Goodfellas or the TV show The Sopranos, despite the fact that it's rises to the level of art, it's still a negative film because there are Italian Americans depicted as mafiosi. So the other side of the equation is positive. And there's been a host of films, which I won't begin to name here, that are, positive films about Italian Americans that are just awful. They're just the most hackneyed script. They're just awful films, and they don't have the kind of they've never had any kind of long-lasting appreciation by anybody, except for in the moment, in the flash of the pan, that these films come out, and some Italian Americans deem them as a model for how Italian Americans should depict it. But yeah, I think that, as you said, I think it's a really important point, the fact that this was not about mafia. Again, high production value, Hollywood film, and it returns again. I think it returns to that the trope of Italian Americans and family as sort of central to kind of a popular, wishful imagination of Italian American identity. Is part of the success of the film among some Italian Americans. Yeah, and Good Night, of course. Good Night is yet another film which
Big Night.
Big Night. What did I say? Good Night. Big Night. Big Night is another one of those films. 10 years later, that was again widely well received. I remember I went to go see it in the movie theater in the Plaza Hotel. And it was packed. And I don't know who was in the audience. It wasn't something in it wasn't in an Italian American neighborhood, but it was really well received. Still held up as an interesting and important film about Italian Americans. And of course, as you said, not about the mafia. And what was interesting, of course, about that, I think, Big Night is really great because it gives us a sense of what we can understand as post-World War II immigration of Italian Americans, so that it's not the sort of older pre-war and assimilated English-speaking Italian Americans, but here we have this new generation of Italian immigrants coming to the United States, and them grappling with the older Italian Americans who want, they want their potatoes or the rice and pasta all together, and the kind of selling out of a certain kind of attention to detail and appreciation for work done well.
And the whole idea of authenticity and what is authentic and what is really Italian American. Think Big Night help pose this question. And of course, it is in a fun and cinematographic way, but these contrast and comparison between different generations and different waves of Italian immigration to the U.S. I think it's as well done as it can be done in a film that is not a documentary. So there is food and here is opera, I would say. The two major cultural staples associated with Italian Americans when we don't talk about the mafia. And in this case, you were saying that when it came out, you had a problem with the fact that it was operatic and it was over the top.
Yeah.
What is your relationship to opera?
Very, very minimal, I'll have to say. There was a wide range of record selection in my household. I think there may have been maybe a Caruso record, an LP, and maybe a Gigli record. But it was not part of my upbringing. And
these records will belong to your parents.
They belong to my parents, mostly to my mother, who had a very eclectic taste. I mean, it ran from Tito Puente and mambo to mainstream American pop, to Sam Cooke, soul singing. It was, and to a lot of Italian imported records as well, because my parents came after the war. But I have to say that I have slowly but surely have begun to venture into the Metropolitan over the past, I'd say, decade, familiarizing myself with opera, and I attribute that introduction to live opera to two dear friends. My folklorist colleague in Philadelphia, Leonard Primiano, who has season tickets to the Met, who comes up before COVID, of course, regularly to come see the opera. And we went to, what did we do? I forgot what we went to go see. I try to hit all the classics, sort of all the Italian classics first. And then to my other dear friend, Stephanie Romeo, who is also a big opera buff. Her late father was also a great fan of the opera. And so I've slowly ventured into opera. I'll admit I don't find myself putting it on, listening to a YouTube clip, or putting on. I think I may have one or two record CDs of any kind of opera recordings. It's something that I've learned to appreciate, but not fully comprehend and fully kind of taken the whole. I get the overall gestalt of it, but I haven't. Mm-hmm. It doesn't sing to me
yet.
Yet.
You still haven't had your Cher moment at the opera, or Julia Roberts moment at the opera, for that matter. In Pretty Woman, there is a moment that is incredibly similar to the opera moment that you have in Moonstruck. And as we said, opera is central to Moonstruck. It's really it's in the soundtrack. It's played through the film, but it's also part of the soundtrack as adaptations of parts of Puccini La Bohème. And then there was the moment of revelation in which Cher goes to the opera with Nicolas Cage, who is, for our viewers who have not seen Moonstruck recently, is the brother of her fiancé, who went to visit his dying mother in Sicily and to ask her her blessing to marry the character that Cher plays. And this great encounter in this bakery, in Inferno di Forno in Brooklyn. And in this unlikely place, you have the sort of rage of Nicolas Cage without a hand. And then the seduction is completed not when they sleep together, but when they go to the opera. And you see Cher crying. And it's the same thing that you see in Pretty Woman. when Julia Roberts is a hooker and she's with this high profile manager, and he rents a private plane and they go to the opera at San Francisco. And again, you have this moment of truth in which they get it. And when do you get opera? When you start crying. That's the sign. It's not like as much an appreciation of the music or an understanding that goes through your brain, but it's when it speaks to your heart in a way that even if you do not understand exactly everything that goes on or everything that they say, you get it when you start crying. That's, I found it interesting that in both these two films, they're very different otherwise, but two major films for when they came up, incredibly successful. There is this role of opera as a sort of the magic moment or the moment of truth in which relationships in this world that is, as you said, it is over the top and exaggerated and extravagantly different from real life. But it's the moment of truth comes during the opera when finally the female protagonist that is introduced to opera by the male protagonist cries because she gets it.
So her hard shell that she's used to protect herself from the world is kind of, it cracks.
It does.
Mm.
You still haven't had your moment.
I haven't. I need to go to the opera more.
Keep us updated on that.
I will. I will. As soon as the pandemic is over, I'll be there again. So tell us about in your special feature for the re-release. Tell us what so what are some of the thoughts that you had? I mean, in addition to what you're expressing now about the use of opera there in Moonstruck.
It's again, I watched it again this past summer because of the piece, and I did when it came out. I was not too fond of it. I couldn't at that moment. Probably I didn't know much about Italian Americans because I was not in the States yet. I mean, I knew they existed. I knew they were a big community. I knew some of their major cultural and artistic representatives, but they were not my adoptive family as they've become. I did not feel part of it, and now I do. So to me, the perspective completely changed from the moment the film came out and now. And also my appreciation of opera was very different. Now I get it in the sense that I cry every single time I go see an opera, and I know exactly the moments in which I cry. And I was introduced to opera as a very young kid, but it was like, to me, it was like a great outing. We would go to the Arena in Verona with big buses from the village, and it was like a huge picnic on the ancient Roman marble steps that were scorching hot after a whole day in the sun. But, as a kid, it was like the great adventure of the summer because all my friends would come with their parents, and it was just a great experience. And then at the Arena, you had horses and camels and elephants on stage. It was like between the circus and the opera. So it was not that as a kid, I was touched profoundly in my feelings by the experience of opera going. That actually happened to me in New York when I started going to the opera and loving it, I have to say. And the Baroness, the founder of the Casa, was a huge fan of the opera. So every now and then she would say, Stefano, I have an extra ticket for the opera tonight. Can you come? Sure. I would drop everything and I would go. And so with her, I saw it. And she knew a lot about opera too. So she also explained and taught me many things. And that's the reason why now at the Casa we have this very informal group called Opera to the People that my colleague Julian Sachs runs. And it's in that spirit. It's very informal. It's for young adults. So it's for students and people of student age, even if they're not students at NYU. And they get together, they decide which operas they're going to see. Like a couple of days before the performance, they meet at the Casa. I buy them great pizza from Ribalta. And they stay there like 2-3 hours talking about the opera. And Julian is great because, again, he doesn't want to teach a class. He wants it to be a group of understanding and learning. So it's super absolute beginners are very encouraged, and they feel free to ask any question because it's not a class context. And I went to some of them, to some of these groups, and they're absolutely fabulous. They're not intimidated to ask any question. Like, what is the little stick that guy holds on and what is it for? Like, from that question to more complex questions about settings and designs and different productions. And so you have a very interesting mix of young people. And then the couple of days later, they go to the opera and Casa provides tickets for them. That's one of the major obstacles for students and young people to go. Even the sort of student tickets for some students can be a problem. So we want that not to be a problem. And that's why we offer them the tickets, and so they can go and enjoy after they've studied together in this sort of group studying experience. And then if we have one of the adventures in Italian opera with Fred Plotkin, with the singer or with the conductor, 2 days later, they also come to that. So they have the full experience. And I think that's important for us. It's really a fundamental part of our culture. And I'm not saying that everybody should love opera, but I think that you cannot ignore opera to understand some of the features of the Italian character. Exaggerated, brought to extreme points in a way that we might even dislike the way in which these things are exaggerated, but it's such a part of the national character that it's really fundamental. And I love seeing the conversions of students, even when I take them here in Florence. It's like there is an opera course taught by my great colleague Roberto Scarcella, who's also a composer. But I always manage to bring them all the students in the program, to see at least one opera during the time of their staying here. And again, it doesn't have to be that everybody becomes, meloman and opera fan, but they must go through that experience. It's to me, it's like it's taking them to an initiation rite. It's like,
yeah. I mean, for me, it was, I kind of felt like, I'm, as a folklorist, I'm familiar with a number and appreciate a number of different popular and vernacular musical forms that are not my own, right? Country music, sort of West African music, classical Iranian music. And I really love the music, and I felt like I was depriving myself of just at the very basic level of not familiarizing myself with some classic operas and going to see them, having that experience, to see them, to hear them, to understand them, to investigate them a little bit more, and to understand them more. And it was something that I was depriving myself, and in part maybe because of the associations of opera to elite culture, to the ways in which it's been framed even within the Italian-American context and the American context at large. So, but I think it's it's part of global culture that has incredible impact in the world, and really needs, and being a New Yorker, having the advantage of having something like the Met be here in our city, to not take advantage of that is, it to me seemed like depriving myself of an important aspect. And I didn't, as a New Yorker, I have to say, a number of us take for granted the incredible gems and jewels that we have in New York City. Everything from the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the MoMA, Broadway theater. And I remember some European non-Italians telling me that I think I mentioned that I had gone to see an opera at the Metropolitan. They said, "Oh, when I come to New York, I always make sure that I go to see an opera at the Met because of its world standard." And, you just think like, oh, it's the Met, I'll get on the train and I'll go to see an opera. And I, for one, sort of don't always fully appreciate that what we have here.
Yeah, and as you said, it was also a generational thing. As I told you, I after going to the opera as a kid, I discovered opera in New York, as I told you, and there was also that moment in our life, where you refuse opera. It's like the establishment, the thing that old people listen to. It's something your grandparents have on all the time, and they speak quoting it all the time. So there, we all go through that phase in which you reject all of that as a part of the traditions you really don't want to associate yourself with, and so the discovery happens in different terms when we decide that we want to discover it. And New York is a great opera scene. I mean, the Metropolitan, of course, is absolutely the best ever in terms of also the fact that they produce new things, they change productions, and the value, the investment that goes into them, the number of people working there. But there is about a complex reality of about 30 opera companies in New York, and some of them do amazing work. And there's Chelsea Opera, and they have this tradition of performing in an Episcopal church, and they adapt the operas to the venue, and then there is on-site opera, and every year they produce one or two operas that are site-specific in places that are just conceived for that specific work. And then there are companies that produce new operas, contemporary stuff. So it's a really lively world, and it's so far from. And that's what I try to explain to the students. Do not think about the ladies with pearls and old men in tuxedos. Yes, that there is that too, and that's part also of the charm of it. But it's way more. And coming from Italy, then you review all your memories. My great grandfather, my grandmother's father, could not read or write. He was a basket weaver, but he was in the chorus of the local opera company. And mind you, it's like a town with 5,000 people. They had an opera theater with a Caesar, with an orchestra, a small orchestra, of course, and the chorus, a small chorus, of course, but a chorus. And the chorus was made up of the people from the town, like my great-grandfather that I've never met, that could not read or write, but that knew the operas by heart, the words. So that was his literature. That was his access to knowledge. It was, and to poetry on some level. It was through the operas that he sang after he had woven baskets and cradles all day. And so there is that also that component to me that comes back. Of course, it's something that I reconstruct in my mind more than the memories that I don't have memories of this. It's like the stories told and retold and retold. But that's sort of opera there somewhere. And it's in all our stories, and I'm sure your family has same things. It's like.
When I went back, well, I mean, it's been a number of times when I went back. One time I went back to my father's hometown, Caruncchio, in Abruzzo, and I discovered a cache of 78 recordings that my grandfather, a tailor, my paternal grandfather, who worked here in New York City, but then returned to Italy and died there. There was a whole series of Caruso records that he brought from New York back to this small little town. And played there, So yeah, very
probably
much
while they were working and
yeah. So, well, this has been great. This is really a wonderful chat. Very much how I envision the Calandra Corner as this kind of dialogue and give and take. And I hope once we broadcast and put it on YouTube, others will see this as the as a template that works for them as well. So I thank you, Stefano, for this.
Thank you, Joe. This was great, as I expected it to be. Thank you.
Great.